thinking of where the characters in the story, where they're happening, and where they could be happening. So the example here we took was Lord of the Rings. You know, there's a sort of a classic map drawn for anyone who's a fan of Lord of the Rings, the layout of Middle Earth. It's been established, you know, through J.R. Tolkien's books, and then Peter Jackson really brought it to life in a crazy way in the movies, which kind of led to a small but, you know, still successful industry that takes place in New Zealand, where they do these tours where you get to go see the actual places where these things were filmed. So that's kind of taken this mythical, fictitious setting and put it in a real place where it's still connected to the Lord of the Rings franchise. So if you're a fan of the story and you go to where they actually, you know, filmed the Bag End, it does something for you. But then in the bottom you have the worlds created by all the video games that came out, taking again the same characters, probably adding some more characters, but putting them in a setting where they could interact in new and unique ways, and the participants of the story could sort of start blending and melding with the characters themselves and becoming characters and participants in the story itself. And then on the far right, in the bottom right, you have the One Ring, which is apparently the largest forum for Lord of the Ring posts, and it's still remarkably active. And this is a setting that's not even really a place, but it's a communication space. And the stuff that happens there, though, does have an impact on your understanding of the story and your understanding of the setting in which the story could take place.
I think the thing to think about the setting here is about the way I was thinking about it is you kind of create rabbit holes and you create souvenirs. So can you also, in addition to having your setting being like fictitious, real world, you know, in communication space, can you also create like a depth, like a rabbit hole that people can go down if they want to know more, where lots of things are possible? And can you create things that people take away from this? And I actually think there's implications even here for something like art direction. So if you look at a movie like Avatar, you know, all these movies are trying to use 3D to basically get people to come to the theaters instead of staying home and watching their high-def televisions. That's like the business desire behind 3D movies. One thing Avatar does is it uses 3D not to create things that fly out at you. It creates more depth behind the screen. So the large majority of the 3D in Avatar is about creating this depth behind the screen. And that to me is actually about world creation. A lot of contemporary storytelling is not just about creating plot, but actually creating a world where people can imagine things to be possible, right? So if you're not always creating all the plot, are you creating an environment where people can imagine other things to be possible? Lord of the Rings is sort of easy because you can imagine people creating a lot of stuff out of it. But even like that technology of Avatar sort of creates this idea of depth where other things are happening, other things have been thought about that they never explain. I think another thing to think about for setting is like, can your story expand very easily? So I think, you know, a couple years ago, probably you, well, you guys weren't here, but you probably had people coming here to say, like, what you should do is make sure everything you make is shareable. I think that's really important. I think everything you make should be shareable and it should be something people want to be shared. And you should always look at an idea and think, would you actually send this to somebody? But I think there are other ways to create something that expands. So I don't know if any of you guys have heard that, you know, all these teenagers who are gay or perceived to be gay have committed suicide over the past couple of weeks. There have been about 8 of them over the past couple of months. So Dan Savage, who's this guy and his partner, Dan Savage is like a columnist for the Seattle Outsider and also writes for a bunch of stuff. They created this video and they created this project called It Gets Better. So they talk, they're gay, and they say, when we were in high school, we got picked on a lot. We were so scrawny, everyone hated us, but hey, it gets better. Like once we got out of high school, we actually had these great lives. We fell in love. We have sex all the time. We are really famous. But basically, like, they start to tell this story about like how high school sucks, but if you can just get through high school, it gets better. And what I like about this story, I mean, there's something very sad about the fact that they have to tell gay teenagers like high school is going to be horrible. Just deal with it. But what I like about it is, one, it's a story, but it's this kind of crazy expandable story where obviously there's a video. Obviously, you can send that to a lot of people. That's really great. But it was an imitable story. So they started to get all these different people. They didn't even ask them. They started kind of telling their story. So Tim Gunn did his like It Gets Better video, and that started to hit the fashion world. There was this other guy who was on the city council of like some city in Austin, and he used his city council meeting to talk about his It Gets Better story. So then it started to spread through like these local politics. There's a pastor who did it. The other thing about this is it's newsworthy, so it started to get on the news. So there's something about that story beyond just like the mere kind of click to send, click to share functionality, which had it expand past the sphere. Because the truth is, Dan Savage is really well respected by a bunch of homos, but I don't know if a bunch of like not gay people, not like queer thinking people really listen to him. But he had a story which allowed it to exist in the fashion space, in the religious space, in the news space, and in the political space. So what you guys should think about is, where does your story exist now? You can only create so many elements, but how can you create it so that it will easily expand into other elements? When you think about expansion, are you just like kind of playing in the same turf of all the campaign elements you were creating before, or can you move somewhere else?
I think it's also interesting to think about different audiences can sort of hand off the story to other audiences. So in this case, I think Tim Gunn might bring in a lot of different people, and then the Episcopalian bishop getting in on it brings in a whole different set of people that may not know who Tim Gunn is. So that's just an interesting way that ideas kind of propagate and actually become viral, is by having the sense of who's the ultimate audience I want to speak to, but actually who are the people I need to speak to first to actually get to that ultimate audience. So I don't know if they were thinking purposefully about that, but they achieved it.